Welcome to the Roxboro House Roundtables. Today's host is Professor Jeff Clements.
Hi. Today we're going to talk about anti-science views in a really general sense. And what I mean by an anti-science view is not that somebody's opposed to science, but that when we look out at the general population, we see that there's this repeated pattern of people, the public, believing things that scientists don't think are the way that the world works. Right? Places where there's pretty uniform scientific consensus on a topic, and the public is out of step with that consensus. And what we're going off of here are a couple of reports that came out of the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, where they compared the views of scientists. They polled them and said, what do you think about this? And then we saw a great big difference between what the scientists thought and what members of the general public thought when they were asked the same question. And the ones in particular that stand out as having these really big gaps are, did humans evolve by this mechanism called natural selection? It's when there's been a long-standing divide. That is a generally accepted statement, 96% in our survey here, by scientists, and a much lower percentage among the general population. Are GMO foods safe to eat? There's another one, a huge divergence. Is climate change happening? And is it caused by people? Are vaccines safe to use, or could they have these side effects, causing autism being more popular? And in all these cases, scientists are clearly on one side of the debate, and the general public is kind of inhabiting this mushy middle space where they're not sure, and there's a lot of media talk about all these things that is just completely out of step with what the scientific consensus is. Furthermore, there's a right-left difference in these things, on some of them, where traditionally anti-evolution has found its home on the right side of the political spectrum. Certainly GMO crops, being anti-GMO, finds its home on the left side of the political spectrum. Climate change, again, is sort of a right-wing view. Being anti-climate change is a right-wing view, or denying the reality of climate change. And then we've got vaccines, which lean a little bit left in terms of who's anti-vaccine, but where there's really wide distribution across the political spectrum. So the question here is not, about the validity of these different views. What we're going to take as a starting point for this discussion is we're going to say, look, humans evolved by natural selection. The climate is changing and it's people's fault. Vaccines are safe, as our scientists and doctors tell us. And genetically modified foods have no demonstrated negative effects on human health. We're going to take those things as true for the purpose of this discussion. Now, what I really want to talk about is more like the ontogeny. Where does this come from? And why do we get this weird spread in some issues? Why do some issues end up on one end of the spectrum and other issues end up sort of not having that pattern? So I think the first question that we have to establish is this all the same thing? Is it just a mirror image? Is there right-wing science and right-wing response to science and left-wing science and left-wing response? Or do we have to treat each of these cases individually? They have their own sort of historical, political, developmental pattern to them.
Before we begin, we'll introduce ourselves and then get to that question.
Okay, let's do that. Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves first. I'm Jeff Clements, and I'm a professor of biology, and I also teach non-majors environmental science here at Philadelphia University.
I'm Corey Rogan, a senior biology student.
Frank Wilkinson, program director of biology.
My name is Maria Sufe, and I am a marketing major with a minor in law and society.
Here's Chai, Philadelphia University student, Law and Society, sophomore.
I'm Barbara Kimmelman. I'm a professor of history here and the academic dean for the College of Science, Health, and Liberal Arts, and I'm an historian of science. So I, just like the scientists and the biologists here, I do have some expertise.
Reason to be.
Yeah, some reason to be.
Chris Pastor, professor of transdisciplinary studies.
Freddie Gumpf, I'm a national student exchange student from the University of Oregon, attending Philadelphia University for the fall semester, and I'm a political science major.
And I'm Evan Lane. I'm the director of Law and Society and the director of the Specter Center for Public Service.
And I'm Jessica Putman. I am the student coordinator for the Roxboro Roundtables, and I'm also a Law and Society major, and I'm a senior.
Great. So let's open it back up to this first question then. Are these the same thing? Are these all, is this the same coin and we're looking at two faces of it? Or are these fundamentally different processes? Are we seeing a unity? Every political movement is going to reject particular forms of science. Or are these all unique things that have to be treated as such? And maybe I would have Barbara start on this as the historian of science, and so they, at least...
Okay. On one basis, I mean, I'm inclined to say that these are different phenomenon from different sources. The fact that people from different political spectrums, take different positions indicates that to me. But I'm going to contradict myself slightly, and I'm surprising myself by saying this, but I think one genesis of this kind of problem is that, and it is a communication problem, Chris and I were talking about a little bit earlier, but it's more than a communication problem. Scientists are more deeply aware of the evidence for this type of climate change, more deeply aware of the evidence for evolution. Evolution is an especially strong case in point. You just can't look around you and see evolution happening. The evidence for evolution is less tangible, requires a great deal of accumulation of data, different kinds of understanding that the general public just simply has not given enough time, and they never would have the time to absorb all of that. So they're asked to take some of these things, ironically, on faith. And similarly for vaccines, again, people hear these reports, they hear sort of scary discussions of it. And again, the evidence that seems so paramount and so strong and that the scientific community is aware of is simply not out there necessarily available to the general public. So I think that's a source of the difference when you're talking about why 98% of scientists believe this and the general public doesn't.
And I get this. So let me follow up your question, and I'll throw this back out to the group and see if somebody has an answer. Because partly, both with evolution, with climate change, none of us can process what's going on with climate change. That is a great, weather and climate are a great example of a highly complex system that can really only be understood statistically, probabilistically. And that we know as human beings, we're not good at thinking statistically and probabilistically. It's not how we're built, right? But if the problem is that we have to submit ourselves to expertise, again, it doesn't get at this fundamental problem. Why are certain forms of expertise appealing to certain parts of the political spectrum, and other forms of expertise are appealing to other forms of the political spectrum? And if that were the problem, I would expect to see a general pattern, or either everything across both sides, or one side was like, we trust expertise, and the other side says we don't trust scientific expertise. I get that pattern. So does anybody have any follow-up?
Evan Lane, I think it's coming from two different areas. You're dealing with power, fear, and distrust issues. When you're looking at the creationism, evolution, intelligent design argument, that's its own category because it's a battle for power. You have on one side, the biggest question I think all of us may agree is, why are we here? And that the person who controls, or the organization that controls the answer to or the discourse on that answer, has the ultimate power. So when you have the churches pushing their idea, because if they lose control of that ultimate answer, they lose a lot of power. And people who believe in that, if they lose that as well, they'll say, my foundation of belief has been rocked. Even though there's many reasons to believe, but that is one of the major questions. So it's the church-state battle that's been going on for a very long time. The other questions, I think the GMO and the anti-vax have to do with the failure of modernity. Going back to religion, when we had the Enlightenment, and we woke up from all those years and we said science is the answer to everything. And then we found out that science was the answer to World War I, World War II, and everything else that happened after that. And we've been lied to many times by science or by corporations pretending to be scientific. So we have lost faith in science. And we rather listen to people like Jenny McCarthy on vaccines, because she's one of, we say air quotes a lot, so you have to say air quotes, one of us, as opposed to those evil scientists who have either let us down or conspired against us with big pharma or conspired against us with big agriculture or whatever it may be. So they're two separate entities. One has to do with the loss of trust in what has to do with faith.
So I agree, and let me just follow up here, and I'm going to challenge back here with another question about, sort of corporations and modernity and science. So I can see those two now, right? Sure, the evolution is a very, very old, there's a reason why Darwin waited so long before he published. There's a reason that he spent a lifetime assembling this evidence. He was not unaware of the bomb that this was going to drop in terms of, human identity, right? Every time we take a further step away from, man and the earth being in the center of this sort of cosmos, there's this reaction to it, Galileo, Copernicus on forward, right? But now we say corporate and science. But what is the fossil fuel industry? What is the energy economy, if not the pinnacle of this modern, industrialized, pro-science, post-World War II, mechanized economy, right? And yet here in the climate change case, what we're saying is, there's this difference between believing the fossil fuel industry, right? So it's not as simple as, rejecting. So did you have a...
I had a first immediate reaction to Chris Pastor, to Evan's comment. Science hasn't lied to us. I just want to throw that out there. Individuals may have, but science hasn't. I think if you take your religion model and extend it further, you're seeing where the narrative comes from. Sticking with Barbara's point, science is complicated. The issues that we're particularly talking about are very complicated, difficult to grasp, and I have an agenda and I have a narrative. If I'm anti-big business and I look at a giant company like Monsanto, I want to pick on a big company like Monsanto because it goes against my fundamental philosophy. So if I can find a story that's scary and complicated and not easy to understand, like Frankenfood, Monsanto equals Frankenfood, it's easy for me to get support. I'm meeting my bigger agenda of anti-big business, but getting there through a lack of understanding and a poor reporting or communication of science and society, and vice versa on the climate change. We'll be pro-oil and using the science to support the oil companies.
And this is Freddie. I don't think with climate change in particular, it's a matter of what type of expertise you trust. It's a matter of if the science of climate change is correct, then the oil companies are going to lose a lot of money, and they have a great deal of lobbying power, and that's how they're able to create the doubt in climate change. So it's not a matter of trusting expertise, it's a matter of people being misled by a huge financial interest that has something to lose.
Certainly, yeah, I would agree with that.
I can't, Matt Baker, can't speak a lot to the climate change thing or evolution, but I certainly can speak to the vaccine. The vaccine brings you to the point of where science and medicine is a little bit confusing, and there are voids that we need to fill in our lives, and where it's a little confusing. So we have a weird habit in medical, and we just did this again twice this year, to change the criteria. Okay, so there was a very wide criteria for autism that was first established in 1900 and something, and then it became a very narrow, that the American Psychiatric Association had a very narrow, and then we changed it again with the next upgrade, and just like we changed the autism spectrum from DSM, that's a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-4 to DSM-5, we changed autism to make it more narrow again. So we changed autism to be broader, and then all of a sudden, people became autistic overnight. The famous story I tell about this is about 10 years ago, not 10 years, but 15 years ago, we changed the criteria for diabetes from a resting blood sugar, a fasting blood sugar of 140 to 126, made you diabetic. And my joke was, and it's not a funny joke, but it's just a joke to students, is that overnight, you woke up the next morning at 12 a.m., if you got up, 6 million people that were diabetic, that were not diabetic before, and nothing happened to their bodies or their physiology. We changed the criteria, and we changed it for good reason. But people don't expect people are going to understand that. So it seemed like there was an epidemic of autism And we didn't have an explanation in medicine about what was causing it. And when you don't have an explanation to what causes chronic fatigue syndrome, or it causes fibromyalgia, or if it causes anything, especially autism, and your kid is affected, then something's going to fill that void. A lot of things are going to fill that void. And then there was a study that showed there was correlation, it wasn't causation, between them, and it took us 10 years for the European studies to come out to show there was no connection between autism and vaccines. But by that time, that void was filled, and all we could say in organized medicine was, we don't know the answer. In 10 years, we will have this large study that's statistically significant. So I think there was a void, and people with these, trying to take care of kids with this, geez, I don't even know what they were feeling.
So there's an interesting comment that comes out of that. It's not just science that is complicated, that Barbara started us off with. It's science process that is complicated and arcane. The details of science are complicated. They're systemic. They are, multifactorial. They're hard to process in our heads. But then science processes its own little arcane thing that then sits as a filter between what's already complex and the rest of the complexity of society.
Maria Sophie, I think it just shows really how impatient we are, because we really don't want to wait at all to really see how everything eventually evolves. So we are so we want to get to the next step as fast as possible, but we really don't want to do the work. We want answers now, but when the work takes so long to get the results you want and to prove your point, then people have moved on and are already believing whatever they want to believe.
How mad are you when your Google result doesn't come up on the first page?
The second page? What is that?
There's data on this with a drop off between stuff. If your name comes up, if you get Googled and your name's on the third page of results, you don't exist. You're just not. You're not even there anymore. Right? That's true. It's a very good point.
I don't think I've gone further than the third page on Google, I have to say. So it really becomes this thing okay, are we going to be patient and wait so we get the results we want? And then have people, how are we going to get the idea of people, hey, wait up a second so we can then figure out what this is actually, and then start believing anything and everything.
And what Matt raised, when I thought you were going, you went one way, but I think as people don't understand science, they expect the answers, you said, Marie, right now. And they think science provides the answer. The scientific process is always growing. We used to think the atom was the smallest particle. Now it's nowhere near the smallest particle. But that leads people to say, well, they were wrong before. Mm-hmm. And when you were talking, Matt, for example, my wife is a mammographer. Every week there's another study. You should have a mammogram at 50. You shouldn't have a mammogram at 50. You should have it at 45. So then if you're the public, you're expecting they have definite answers. And then you say, you know what? They don't know what they're doing because you don't understand the scientific process. Or you go another way saying, I'm being fooled, that there's darker forces behind this. There are doctors who want me to take that drug to make money. So it's this inability of the immediate answer that Maria says, not understanding the scientific processes you laid out, Matt, that grows on each other with increasing knowledge, and they lose faith or think they're being lied to.
Well, you touched something really interesting. Where does conspiracy live? Conspiracy lives in the shadows, and there's a series of shadows that get generated by just simply, the lack of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Right? When something seems opaque, even if it isn't actually being done in an opaque way.
Barbara Kimmelman, I wanted to revisit our opening question about where do these views originate, and you were saying that some lie more toward the left and some lie more to the right. I think that the answer that they originate from different sources, that it's not one specific thing generating all this, is that in fact you can find multiple sources of objection to the same issue coming from different arenas, different areas. So if you take, let's say genetically modified foods, and you say, are these safe to eat? Some objections really might derive from this notion that, if you really take genes out of one thing to another, we've seen these movies, Outbreak, things like this, that this really could be a problem, that you're creating a kind of a monster that could really, damage a person. Then there's environmental sources. These things will escape a controlled area and they will get out there in the environment and do damage to the environment. This is a somewhat different source of worry. Another objection to genetically modified foods doesn't even have to suggest or acknowledge that they're dangerous to eat. Their objection is a purely economic one. This large corporation has created this thing, and now they want to patent it, and they want to control it, and they want to dictate to farmers how to use it, whether they can use it, that they must buy it. So whether it's safe or not is actually irrelevant to that argument. So it's not a matter of trusting scientists or not scientists, it's a matter of having an economic objection to this pattern of agricultural development.
So here's a question, right? And we go and we say, okay, I think that, I'm going to make a statement. I think that we could ask the question around the room and say, is it okay to patent a gene? And we would probably get a range of answers of whether that's an okay thing to do. And I think that that is a completely non-scientific question. I think that's in policy. Does anybody object to that? I'm patenting a gene. That's a policy, that's a society economics question.
Not, yeah.
Okay. But now if I'm the kind of person who looks at the idea of patenting a gene with some horror, right, as maybe I am,
yeah.
right, and I look at that and I say that's the behavior of a bad actor, and this push to do that is the behavior of a group of bad actors, am I then more likely to be susceptible to claims that this then resulting process, I don't know, do you guys have any, let me throw this over here to the biologists we have on the couch on the side of Corey and Frank. Do you think that it could be sort of a carry-on negative response?
I think this is Frank. I think there's a lot of psychological mechanisms at play here. I hesitate to want to pin it on one exclusively. Chris Pastor brought up earlier that narrative bias that we have. We tend to believe in stories, and I was thinking about this as a follow-up as the conversation went on about the capacity to distance ourselves from our bias and how challenging that is, and I think requires a fair bit of very dedicated training on the part of the individual. I don't think it happens automatically. Losing myself in my own thoughts. I just think there's a lot of psychology. It's coming back. So I think evaluating evidence scientifically, I think, isn't a behavior most of us would adopt automatically. I think we have to be trained to do that. So I tend to think we may, as a whole, steer away from evaluating evidence and fall victim to the narrative bias. So that's one psychological mechanism. I think there are probably dozens of others involved in this. I wouldn't want to put it on this one.
What this really makes me think of, this is Corey Rogan, is how much of science is an education issue. And like the perfect example I have of this is I worked at John Hines National Wildlife Refuge for U.S. Fish and Wildlife over the summer. And I was very close with a coworker that did environmental education. And she worked with a wide range of ages. And one thing that I found extremely surprising was she had a group of middle school students from Philadelphia, and before they walk into the park, she asks, what do you think you're going to see when we get in there? And these children, middle school age, think they're going to see alligators and zebras and these ridiculous things that are extremely surprising. Like, I wouldn't think that a middle school student would think that way. So it's this huge education gap that I think people are ignoring.
You said we underestimate as people who are science literate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in this room, we underestimate the science illiteracy of the rest of the population.
Absolutely, I do.
People expect, nobody's comfortable with ambiguity. People,
I don't know if that's true.
Yeah,
expect.
I've heard over that designers are.
Maybe, maybe not.
People like answers
to
things, and they want clear answers. And at least in the realm of medicine, it is. But all science can be said to do this. But people could rightfully say, if you were right about stuff, why do you change your criteria for cholesterol every 3 to 5 years? Things evolve. Anything that we knew about volcanoes, say, after plate tectonics was created, it was all thrown in the trash. And it doesn't mean that it was terrible. It just means that everything evolves, and there's still a lot of ambiguity, and it's going to change. And but yet we are taught from a young age, I think, this is just my opinion, that we are taught that that's the way maybe social sciences, maybe psychology is, but science is science. It's fact. It's fact. When things, Harry will tell you, things in physics, that you thought you knew, somebody discovered something else. Geology is a good example. Biology, now the book changes every year because things get discovered all the time that we didn't know, and it is just a really, 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 there are things that are fact. We know the world's not flat anymore, but that was fact at one time, and scientists could say something was a fact. I think we're uncomfortable when science gives us, not when somebody gives us some advice on something else. They always know, well, if an ethicist gave you two opinions, they'll say, well, I can accept that. But a scientist is supposed to give you the right answer, and there's supposed to be one right answer forever, and that just doesn't exist.
And if we look climate change is probably the most policy relevant of these in terms of people hearing individual conversations. And one of the real failings, one of the things that the climate scientists recognize is that when you try and make regional models predicting climate, they're all over the place. The global models work better than the specific regional models, which kind of violates our baseline assumption, right? The big picture should be harder to get, but the smaller details should be. And it's not, in some regions, all the models predict the same thing, and in other regions, they're wildly divergent. California's either going to get hotter and drier or colder and wetter. Well, thanks. That's not in the realm of unsatisfying answers. That still has its own special place,
it's
right?
not intuitive.
But the problem is that when we start converging on something that looks like scientific consensus, that ambiguity, that necessary part of the process, if we're teaching science the right way, we're teaching it as a process of getting slightly less wrong every year, right? We're less wrong this year than we were last year, right?
That's exactly
and
right.
so we throw that theory out, and then we kind of start all over with the new understanding. And if we accept that level of ambiguity, which we have to, because science is just this sort of process by which humans go about learning things. It's not a body of set knowledge, right? If we accept the ambiguity in the process, that ambiguity can become the refuge of scoundrels who wish us ill, who want our money, and who are perfectly willing to hide behind the ambiguity as an excuse for action or inaction or rejection or pushing of a particular sort of project or strategy. So how do you...
So now I'm thinking, hearing all these pieces together, a great point. Science is complicated. Scientific process is complicated. Science education is below where those of us in this room would like it to be. What ethical responsibility does the media have to try to make clear to the viewers, to the listeners, whatever it may be, what is scientific fact, what is opinion, what is narrative?
And can I respond to that with just one little piece to kind of bring back? When we posted yesterday that this was happening, we got an email that said, how can you compare GMOs to climate change? And the tone of it was sort of like... Angry. And it was like, how can you compare people with their concerns about GMOs and vaccines to those dum-dums who don't believe in evolution, right? I mean, it's this sort of... right? I mean, let's get a little bit how it came across, right? And then in further explanations that, I'm just sick of this false equivalence,
false balance,
which is kind of what I was getting at with these initial questions. Is this one set of beliefs just a mirror of the other? Is it that there's left-wing kooky science beliefs and right-wing kooky science beliefs? And there was an article, our other colleague sent us an article this morning that was exactly that kind of even-handed saying nothing nonsense, right?
Right.
Some left-wingers believe this goofy thing. Some right-wingers believe this goofy thing. On balance, it's all the same. Everybody's got a big problem with science in their political party.
And they do. Which is why I ask, does the media, does journalism, have an obligation to distinguish between science reporting and storytelling?
This is Freddie. Well, apparently, according to the Supreme Court, the media has no duty to tell us the truth at all. And
well, I asked ethical, not legal.
Okay.
They're two very different things.
Ethically, you can go for it.
Right. Yeah, ethically they absolutely do. They are our source. I mean, we discussed this in our First Amendment seminar class, and one of the things that we were wrestling with is that the news media is our place that we go to for knowledge, because we can't all be experts on GMOs. We can't be experts on climate change. We can't be experts on foreign policy. I mean, some of us can be more knowledgeable at each individual of these things than others, but we can't be experts on all of it. So we have to have a trusted place to go to of people who are able to be experts in each one of these things and provide us with that knowledge. So yes, the media absolutely does have an ethical responsibility to provide us with that knowledge.
Going along, this is Jessica, going along with that, how we were talking about how we want everything so quick and sudden. I think that's where the media really comes in play, because people always say, well, you can go and do your own research about it, go find out more, but we live busy lives, college students, teachers, people in general, we're always on the go. When you can have the news app on your phone, you can sit down for your 5 minutes and watch the news or hear it on the radio. If they're just spewing you things that aren't true, I mean, how much time do you really have to sit back and actually research it and make sure they're telling you the truth when you already have this faith in the media that they're supposed to be telling you the truth? So I think that's something the media really needs to fix.
You know, with Dr. Clemens and I did an interesting experiment, even though it wasn't intended as an experiment, in our environmental science class, where we showed the students a little 3-4 minute segment from Good Morning America talking about genetically modified organisms. And the story was, did you know there were GMOs in your food? Let's talk to this person. No, she didn't know. We'll talk to this one. They didn't know. That was the whole story. And then they had a list of products and said, look, this says GMOs, this does.
She had the cornflakes out, and she was shaking the cornflake box. And
But doesn't even
they're in the cornflakes.
it doesn't even tell you what it is, though.
And then we asked the students, so what did you learn from this?
Nothing.
And they all agreed, nothing. Then we showed them a 5-minute segment from a Nova Frontline joint produced thing about GMOs, where they talk about what are GMOs, what are transgenic genes, why are people upset, why are people not upset. Very, very Nova, very frontline scientific thing. And asked them what did they learn, and they actually learned some stuff. I went a little bit further and asked the students, which one did you think was more interesting to watch? And they said, the Nova.
Oh.
I said, which one will you watch when you get home? Good Morning America. Because it's easier.
Right.
Hey, top 10 hottest climate deniers, photos. That BuzzFeed listicle kind of world, right? I mean, it's everything that's fast and sort of...
I don't want to have to think, because that's hard.
I want to throw back at Chris something about this idea of ethical obligation of the news media when dealing with science. I have certain friends who would say that if we're talking about a publicly traded company, the editors and the publishers of that company have an ethical obligation of their shareholders to publish the things that people want to read.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely.
And
Because
so-
the viewers are driving the media.
And what science articles do people want to hear? They want to hear the nutrition stuff. We always complain about the nutrition stuff being this seesaw. Last week they said they eat this, and this week they say not to. But yeah, there must be a reason that those are the most frequent. I mean, the nutrition science is vastly overrepresented in our nation's science pages.
Weight loss.
Sure.
Weight loss.
Mm-hmm. And something you can do, right, if they say don't eat eggs or eat eggs, you can do something about it.
Right.
If they say reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere to below 350 parts per million, you're like, well, okay, if I drive an extra half hour this week, will that matter? No, I don't know. Right? You can't really do anything about the more complicated, more sophisticated issues.
Well, that's an interesting piece, yeah.
I think you could do something about the more complicated issues if there was a better way to teach science in schools to kids, because a lot of, for me, I'm only 20, so I can remember I know, for a fact, this is what happened in my science classes. Some of them were so boring. It was, nothing but straight, this is what it is, this is what it's going to be, and that's it. There's no spark to it to really get, I'm interested in science, but, for other kids, it was no spark to get them interested in it. But, I found other ways that you can, find science interesting, especially if you can find something that's interesting to you and related to other things. And I think if science was taught on a level where it sparked more interest in children and progressed and literally told them the different things, like science changes, it's never exactly the same thing. Sometimes it evolves, sometimes we have to throw it all away and start all over because we were completely wrong. It will probably be easier to like discuss science in news and media and like to actually have a conversation where people don't think global warming doesn't exist and it's all made up. So
Well, this is GI. What I want to point out here is profit is one thing that I'm really concerned about the media when they report over scientific issues. However, is that our obligation to determine if we should just get scientific facts or comments from media instead of doing our own research? You're so convinced by the media or whatever they say on there, they claim experts. When you see them on
Air
TV,
quotes.
about they're experts. Sometimes experts are biased as well. They are so entitled to their own belief.
Sure.
They're so entitled to their own belief. They did different research. And I remember this. I don't remember if that's from BuzzFeed, but I think I saw it on YouTube. It's called "What If Google is a Guy?" Very funny video. This girl went so basically they had this guy playing Google. This guy knows everything. Got a really trash office, and people come here and ask him questions. And this girl came in here asking, "Does vaccine cause autism?" And Google presented 2 stacks of evidence. One stack is sky high. I have this stack telling that autism cannot be caused by vaccine, and another stack reads saying like one piece of paper and said, this stack is showing that vaccine will cause autism. And the girl took the one piece of paper and said, "I knew it." So education is really important. How do we have the ability, or do the modern human being have the ability, or even inspired to think, should we dig the truth out of all this nonsense? Are we supposed to rely on media to tell us the truth, or should we make our own determination?
Well, I think, this is Corey, a huge part of that is we should be taught to question everything. If we don't question, we can't progress, we can't learn. But people are often afraid to question their own beliefs and sort of this introspection. But I think we should promote that, because then that would solve a lot of issues. That would make science so much more interesting.
Right.
If you could walk into science class and have a question and explore that.
Corey, the only problem I have with what you said, it sounds really good, but when you question everything, you trust nothing. And you get people who just will not accept anymore and believe that their beliefs are more important than those who have done actual research. So there's a real balance on, you should question, but you have to also accept. And if you question everything, then it leads to this awful apathy that ends up with it. It's all garbage. Everyone lies to me all the time, and you withdraw from it. You've seen it politically.
I'll let Corey say. I
I
didn't
don't
think
mean
that's
it
what
in
you
that
meant.
extreme. I mean it in the sense that you shouldn't just believe everything that's spoon-fed to you, is what I mean. Like, just because you walk into class and they say this is correct, you shouldn't automatically assume that's correct. You should find out for yourself.
Absolutely.
You should have that ambition to look further into issues, especially things that you're interested in.
This is Freddie. I think what she's getting at is, in the words of Ronald Reagan, trust but verify.
Perfect.
That's good.
Part of it is, I borrowed this book from Jeff a couple of years ago. Kahneman
Have you
talks
given it
about
back yet?
no, not yet. It's a running joke at this point. It's still his book, but it's a running joke. We got the type what do you call System 1 and System 2 brains, and whether you believe that that's an accurate representation of the brain or not, there are certain things that are easy for us to do, and those are the ones where we let our guard down. I think Corey's telling us, let's try to be more skeptical. Let's use System 2 as much as possible. It's always been a dream of mine to try to use System 2 all the time, but it is exhausting. It's hard. And so I agree, we need to do it more, but the reason people don't is it's easier not to.
This is Jessica, but I think if it's taught to kids at a young age, it kind of becomes like an automatic thing to you instead of being harder. Because like I was well, I wasn't taught that through school, but I was taught that through my uncle, that you should always question things, never just take things for what it says.
Right.
But at the same time, you should still believe in stuff. Don't just completely disregard everything. But I feel like that helped me through school because I was always like, well, why does it say this and not this when I read it somewhere else? Like, which one is the truth? But I don't find it as tiring because I was taught all my life to do it. So, like, I've automatically become, like, used to it. So I think if children are taught that way, it kind of become like an automatic system for them to question.
So this gets down to patterns of thinking. And so as we come back again and again to this sort of, try and bring it back around to this question of the political divide, could it be that the system one, right, that's built up in certain groups of people is different than the system one in other groups of people? So that system one means the model, the framework within which you interpret things coming in. If you generally look at the world and say, the world now is better than the world our grandparents were in, consumer products are great, my car is awesome, right? Science is carrying us forward in a very sort of 1950s, look at trust the man in the white lab coat sense, right? Then you are likely to not sort of, I remember one of the most bizarre moments in contemporary politics was this kind of worldview clash, where George Bush, in the debate with Al Gore, says, you know, I've heard Al Gore talk a lot about that internal combustion engine, and I think that internal combustion engine's done a lot of great things. And the look on Al Gore's face was captured very well by Saturday Night Live, and it's like, I'm losing this debate. Like the question, it was just such a worldview question of like, what, are you kidding? Like you're saying, like, yeah, of course the internal combustion engine's great and it's done good things, right? But it represented the idea that somehow attacking climate change is attacking gas-powered, modern, contemporary culture. I mean, you want us all to go live in New Zealand and tend sheep or something, right? Is that the flip side of what you hippies want us to do? Likewise, if we look at GMOs, there is this sort of idea that a lot of liberals share that you can change the world through consumerism. It's a very contemporary, rich society liberal viewpoint to say, I can go out and through my buying patterns, make the world a different kind of place. Is that why coming to them with GMOs and saying, hey, GMOs, organic, these different patterns, you'll make the world a better place by staying away from GMO free? Is that the filter through which these things are going?
I think that returns to my point about why people should do their own research and understand what really those things stands for instead of receiving information from media. Because what often you get from media is they make a decision for you, either right or wrong. For GMO, for climate change, those things they're scientific related, but they're different. So, especially, I just want to go in specifically about GMO. I think people, my personal opinion, people should make their own mind for that. If you are fine with GMO, go with GMO. If you're not fine with it, go with something else. But the problem is, at least in media, they're trying to drive you to a mental status you can only determine is right or wrong, and you can only receive information from what they feed you. So that's what's really pathetic about it.
I think, again, this goes back to, I think, what Matt was saying before about definitions and the broadening and the narrowing. It'll also matter how we define a genetically modified food or organism. When we say it's all in the cornflakes, it's all in this, it's all in that, we're talking about corn. I mean, one could say we don't teach people science properly. I'll make a little pitch for the history of science. People don't understand history very well, or the history of science. Foods that we've been eating for generations upon generations have been genetically modified by plant breeders, taking, pollen from one plant and pollinating, another plant with it, and doing crossbreeding and interbreeding varieties. And as people who have studied and understood the origin of species by Darwin know that Darwin's big point was that there was not a fundamental distinction between varieties and species. It was actually one of his most powerful arguments in support of natural selection. So if you can crossbreed these varieties, then you're really exchanging genetic material. And the Andean farmers did that for potatoes, And then as corporations grew, hybrid corn, people could make the exact same argument against hybrid corn that economically that they're making against GMOs and Monsanto, but no one ever argued that hybrid corn was dangerous to eat, right? Because it had been genetically manipulated.
But some of these crossbred produce were dangerous to eat.
Well, in terms of what, Chris? Let's hear. That's good. No, that's an excellent point.
There were toxic potatoes developed. There's celery that burns your skin.
Yeah.
And cynically, right? I mean, when you crossbreed with pollen, you're not sure what you're going to get.
Right. No, you don't know, but then...
So it's safer to do it scientifically.
That's
That's your
more
point.
scientifically, which is the
Well, we have more precision now, right? Scalpel instead of axe.
I want to go back to the beginning, though, because we're talking about Monsanto and how science has let us down at times. You have Dow Chemical, you've got Bhopal, you've got those situations where big chemical companies have destroyed the environment. So that discourse just transfers into Monsanto. Whether Monsanto is doing the greatest thing in the world by doing GMOs, that discourse stays with it. It's hard. Once you get that story out, it's like the story of autism, whatever it is, once the public has it in its head, and it gets exploited by the media because it makes for the good guy, bad guy scenario that sells or gets ratings, you can't get that out. So that's where it comes from, as opposed to, getting back to the beginning, creationism. And one thing I wanted to mention, it's also a family element to that. And that's why people believe that. My mother, father believes, so I believe, and I don't want to believe anything but that because it's a betrayal of my family. So it's a whole different thing.
And that brings me to my final point. How much of this, so let's go, and I agree with you guys, that really people should be digging into this on their own and coming to their conclusions and thinking deeply about it. But let's go also with Bertie's point here that not everybody's going to have time to dig into everything. So how much of this is team sports? And what I mean by that is the fact that I don't particularly care for football, but I live in Philadelphia and I hang around with all these people, so I'm just going to go ahead and be an Eagles fan or whatever that ends up being. Is it that I look at the people around me who I have chosen this political party or been born into this political party or whatever chosen, and I go, hey, we're the political party that doesn't like thing X.
Yeah.
That's part of my identity. How much do you think of these sort of big, the ones that do have the big political divides, how much of it is social effect?
Like a Maslow belonging kind of thing.
And I think that you should just go in, you should explore things and research, but I go into everything saying, I know I'm coming in with my baggage. I know where my baggage is. I know when I'm coming in with my baggage. I know I am my upbringing, the people I hang out with, the people I go to dinner with, the radio station I listen to in the morning informs the way I'm going to think about, and it filters what comes in to mine. I mean, and it's just like the famous saying in Washington D.C. Washington D.C. is 2 million people with a solution waiting for a problem. Everything is. So I do, and I also, and the unsatisfying answer, and I give this, my father asked me all these questions like, is this medicine good for you? Every medicine is good for you. Every medicine is bad for you. Every scientific discovery is good for you, and every scientific discovery is bad for you. But it's not like there's no right answer, because some are more good than they're bad. They're going to have some medicines are going to have side effects, but they're not. But they're going to be more better for you at this time. And so at the end of the day, you do have to find people you trust or sources you trust, knowing they're not always going to be right. But at least at the end of the day, do some research, find something you trust, and make the decision.
My concern here with the way, I agree with what's being said about that, but I think there's a possibility that we're going to be pulled away from the notion of the sources of anti-scientific thinking, because the exact same explanation we're giving is an explanation of why people believe President Obama is a Muslim, or why people believe that President Obama wasn't born in the United States. It's just a matter of, I've gone to the sources I trust, and that's what they've told me. Neither of those statements are scientific statements. Neither of those statements have any, no scientist has weighed in on this with scientific evidence, whether he's a Muslim or not. The closest to scientific evidence I ever saw, and this was someone who's related to me by marriage, posted up a picture of the president with pictures of other Muslims. He said, see, doesn't he look like a lot of them?
The good
Now,
news
is that
is,
scientific evidence? I don't know. There were pictures.
good news is that on the last 2 or 3 polls on this, the majority of people don't believe it.
Oh, good.
They never
Well, I'm
do.
glad. Well, I don't know if the
But
majority
some
ever
do,
did.
not zero.
But so
Some
for
people
me,
do.
I want to
Everything.
be able for us to distinguish, since this is what the topic is, between sources of anti-scientific thinking. I don't want to just say, oh, it's the media, because the media can produce these weird beliefs and this sort of associationist, oh, I'm going to go with my party, I'm going to go with my party. I do think that the scientific stuff is deeper because of the relationship of science to faith, and I do want to say that it's never always been antagonistic, ever. And there's plenty of deeply religious scientists out there who are doing science and believe in climate change and believe in evolution, and they come to some accommodation that way. But I think because science is such a significant human activity and the attempt to understand nature, pre-scientific attempts to understand nature, and religious faith is such a fundamental human activity, and markets, business is such a fundamental human activity, the relationship between those things is so deeply complex that I think that that's a different story than trying to manipulate the public to support a political candidate or not. I think that, frankly, the nature, the original questions got at deeper issues than, it's just the media or it's just the group I belong to somehow. And I'm wondering if we're not falling victim to ourselves. We want quicker answers. We want quicker answers that we're going to get if we just keep sitting around doing that.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, one easy answer would be to say that every time we see something like this, it's the result of scoundrels who don't care what the science is. If we look at the Princeton philosopher Harry Frankfurter, a very valuable, very short book of his is called On Bullshit, in which he defines bullshit as saying something that you don't care whether or not it's true to get a certain effect. Not lying, just simply not caring. Saying things that are expedient, right? And there is a lot of political expedience that drives this. And we very recently saw the phenomenon, or didn't, if we were wiser, of 2 physicians standing on a debate stage, unwilling to sort of take a hard line on the topic of vaccines. And 2 people who clearly knew better, who found it expedient in that position to not do better. And there are certainly, these things are all over. So we've our scoundrel explanation, our team sports explanation, and they're all a little bit unsatisfying. And I feel like there is something deeper here that we haven't gotten at. But I would like to thank everybody for coming out to the Roxboro Roundtable. Thanks, Evan, and
Thank you, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank you.